It was a day unlike any other on the alien world of Drazal, a planet filled with vast cities and towering spires made of silverstone. The sky was a rich, deep purple, with multiple moons hanging like jewels in the night. Drazal's people had a tradition, an event that was eagerly anticipated every year. It was called the Eternal Challenge, a competition where the strongest warriors from across the galaxy came to test their strength and skill. Princess Thalira, the leader of the Drazal warriors, had been undefeated for 22 years. She was the embodiment of power and pride, her reputation as a fighter extending across the stars. Her alien features were striking. Long silver hair that shimmered under the twin suns, skin the color of polished marble, and eyes that glowed faintly with the energy of the stars. She was a vision of grace and strength, admired and feared in equal measure. The people of Drazal revered her, and so did the galaxy. No one had ever managed to best her in combat, and every year, the challenge grew more intense. Warriors from every corner of the universe came to face her, but none had succeeded. Thalira's pride was as immense as her strength, and she wore her title as the champion with unwavering confidence. The Eternal Challenge was more than just a fight. It was a spectacle, a grand event watched by thousands of spectators both on the planet and through holograms across the galaxy. But today the arena was filled with more than the usual excitement. Today there was a different energy in the air, an undercurrent of tension. The grand arena stood at the heart of the city, a colossal structure with walls made from the gleaming crystals that could only be found on Drazal. Spectators lined the outer edges, and in the center, there was a large circular stage where the combatants would fight. Today, the atmosphere was electric, buzzing with anticipation. Thalira stood at the center of the stage, her silver armor gleaming in the light, her posture regal and strong. The crowd fell silent, waiting for her to speak. A deep, confident voice filled the air as she addressed the assembly. "Today I issue a challenge," Thalira said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Any warrior, be they human, alien, or anything in between, who believes they can defeat me, step forward. If you can best me in combat, I will honor my word and marry you." A ripple of laughter swept through the crowd. The idea of a human or any being defeating Thalira seemed impossible. She was unbeatable, a living legend. Her words were playful, almost teasing, but her reputation made it clear that she wasn't joking about the marriage part. It was a test, a challenge that no one had ever dared to take. Thalira's laughter echoed through the arena as she looked at the faces around her. The crowd shifted uneasily, unsure if anyone would be foolish enough to accept her challenge. But then, from the back of the crowd, a voice called out, "I'll take your challenge." The voice was calm, steady, and it cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade. Everyone turned to see a human man stepping forward. His appearance was unremarkable. Tall, dressed in the simple military garb of an Earth soldier. He had short brown hair and a determined look on his face. His name was Mark. Mark had never been to Drazal before, and he had no idea what the Eternal Challenge was. But when he heard Thalira's boast, something inside him stirred. He wasn't the strongest man, and he wasn't foolish enough to think he could outmatch her in pure physical strength. But he was something she hadn't counted on. Human. And humans were adaptable, resourceful. He knew he could find a way to win. For a moment, there was silence. The crowd stared, astonished that a human would be bold enough to accept such a challenge. Thalira raised an eyebrow, her expression one of mild surprise. She had expected some alien warrior to step forward, perhaps a Zorvian from the planet Gallon, or a Gaxian from the far reaches of the galaxy. But a human? A species known for their frailty and lack of natural strength? She laughed again, the sound like the wind rustling through the trees. "You truly believe you can defeat me, human?" Her voice carried across the arena. "I am Thalira, the undefeated warrior of Drazal. You are but a man. What makes you think you can stand against me?" Mark stood his ground. "You said that if anyone could defeat you, they'd earn your hand in marriage. I think I can do it, and I'm serious about it." The crowd gasped. some even chuckling at his audacity. Thalira's expression shifted from amusement to something harder. Her pride flared up, but she was also intrigued. There was something about this human that made her pause, something in his eyes that suggested he was not someone to be taken lightly. "You are bold, human. I will give you that. But know this. I will not go easy on you." Mark nodded. "I wouldn't expect you to." The crowd erupted in cheers and jeers, and the duel was set. Thalira stepped to one side of the arena, her armor shimmering under. The twin sons, her posture relaxed but ready for action. Mark took his place on the opposite side. A silence fell over the arena as the two combatants sized each other up. Thalira was clearly the more imposing figure, but Mark had a glint in his eye, something that hinted at the possibility of victory, however unlikely. The fight began. Thalira moved first, her speed shocking. She closed the distance between them. In an instant, her blade drawn. Mark barely had time to react, his instincts kicking in as he dodged to the side. He wasn't fast enough to avoid the blow entirely, but he managed to evade the worst of it, feeling the sharp edge of her weapon graze his arm. The crowd gasped and Thalira smirked. "You're faster than I thought," she said, "but not fast enough." Mark wasn't deterred. He rolled away, quickly getting back to his feet. He knew he couldn't match her in pure strength or speed, but there were other ways to win. He was thinking outside the box. He focused, his mind racing. He needed to stay unpredictable. If he could get inside her head, confuse her, he might have a chance. Mark's hand moved to his belt, pulling out a small device, a high-tech grappling hook that he'd brought along as a tool. It wasn't meant for combat, but it could be useful. As Thalira lunged at him again, Mark hurled the device toward a nearby pillar. The hook latched onto the stone, and he used the momentum to swing himself out of the way, narrowly avoiding another strike. The crowd gasped in surprise. Thalira's eyes narrowed. "Impressive," she said, but her tone was no longer mocking. "You are resourceful, human, but resourcefulness alone won't win you this fight." The fight continued, the arena a blur of motion. Thalira was relentless, her attacks coming faster and more fiercely. Mark was forced to keep dodging, using his human agility to his advantage. He realized that if he didn't find a way to turn the tables soon, he'd be exhausted long before the fight was over. Thalira's moves were flawless, and Mark's chances of winning seemed slim. But there was something inside him, something that urged him to keep going. He wasn't about to give up, he had already made up his mind, and he wasn't about to lose. Not after everything he had fought for in his life. Just when it seemed like the battle would be over, Mark made his move. As Thalira swung her blade at him, he ducked low, using his opponent's own momentum against her. With a quick twist, he disarmed her, sending her blade skidding across the arena floor. For the first time, Thalira faltered, her confidence shaken. Mark stood before her, chest heaving, but his gaze unwavering. "It's over," he said, his voice firm. The crowd fell, silent, stunned. Thalira was left speechless, staring at the human who had just defeated her in combat. Her pride was shattered. She had never imagined this day would come. And yet, here it was. The crowd erupted in applause, though Thalira barely heard it. Her mind was still reeling from the unexpected turn of events. Mark had won. And now she had no choice but to honor her word. With great effort, Thalira regained her composure. "A challenge is a challenge," she said, her voice cool despite the inner turmoil. "You have won, human, and I will honor my word. I will marry you." The crowd cheered again, but Thalira could only think of one thing: how her world had just been turned upside down by a human. Mark stood victorious, his chest heaving with exhaustion, his body covered in cuts and bruises. The cheers from the crowd echoed in his ears, but they sounded distant, like they were coming from another world. He had won. The challenge was over. Yet in that moment he felt a strange weight settle over him. Princess Thalira stood before him, disarmed and humbled. Her tall, imposing figure now seemed smaller somehow, her once proud posture faltering. Mark had seen warriors lose before, but none like this. She had never expected to be defeated by a human, and that realization seemed to shake her to the core. The silence between them was thick with tension. Mark, despite his victory, didn't quite know what to do. He had never imagined he would actually win. His heart raced, and the words she had spoken earlier came back to him. If a human ever beats me, I'll marry him. Her eyes were filled with a mix of disbelief and pride, but also something else, something Mark couldn't quite read. He had expected anger, maybe even an attempt to dismiss the fight, but there was nothing of the sort. Instead, she gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as though she had come to terms with the result. "You have won," Thalira said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "I will honor my word." Mark wasn't sure how to respond. Part of him wanted to laugh, the absurdity of it all overwhelming him, but the other part felt a sense of unease. He had just defeated one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and no, the palace was as grand as it was overwhelming. Mark had spent the last few days adjusting to life in the royal chambers, but the enormity of the task ahead still loomed over him. He had defeated the mighty Thalira in the arena, and now he was supposed to marry her. The thought was almost too much to wrap his mind around. A human soldier married to an alien princess. His life had taken a strange turn. Mark had learned that the Drazal people took marriage very seriously. It wasn't just about love or affection, but about politics, power, and alliances. To marry Thalira meant to become part of a ruling dynasty, and it wasn't something done lightly. The rituals and customs were complex, and Mark had no idea what he was getting into. The days following the challenge were filled with preparations. Royal attendants came and went, bringing him fine clothes to wear and instructing him on the various customs. They treated him with a mixture of awe and curiosity. To them, he was still an outsider, a human who had somehow managed to do the impossible. But it wasn't just the royal staff who were curious. The people of Drazal had heard the news of Thalira's defeat, and the entire kingdom seemed to be watching him. He was the man who had beaten their undefeated princess, the man who had won her, hand in marriage. To many, he was an enigma, a symbol of something they could hardly comprehend. Mark's days were filled with lessons on Drazalian customs, political protocols, and the complex history of the royal family. It was all so much to absorb, and Mark struggled to keep up. The language, though similar to his own, had nuances that were hard to grasp. He had been told that he would eventually need to understand it fluently, but for now he had a translator to help. Through it all, Thalira remained a distant figure, though not out of malice. She was busy with her own duties, overseeing the preparations for their union. Yet, when their paths crossed, there was always a lingering tension between them, an awkwardness that neither of them could quite shake. The truth was, neither one of them knew how to approach the situation. They had been adversaries, and now they were to be something else entirely. One afternoon, Mark found himself alone in one of the palace gardens, the vibrant colors of alien flowers surrounding him. The air was thick with the scent of sweet-smelling blossoms, and the sun bathed the entire scene in a soft golden light. He walked slowly, trying to make sense of the whirlwind that had become his life. The sound of footsteps behind him interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find Thalira approaching, dressed in a simple gown of pale blue, her silver hair cascading down her back. She was breathtaking, even in such simple attire, and Mark couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of awe and anxiety. "You wanted to speak with me?" Thalira's voice was calm, but there was a hint of uncertainty beneath it. Mark nodded, his heart racing. I wanted to understand what's really happening here, what's expected of me. I didn't come here to marry you, Thalira. I came to do a job, and now everything's changed." Thalira's eyes softened, and she stepped closer. "I understand. This is as strange for me as it is for you. But the challenge was made, and you won. I am bound by my word, just as you are. But I want to be clear with you. I don't expect you to be something you're not. We are partners in this, whether we want to be or not. Mark frowned, feeling the weight of her words. Partners? But in what sense? This is a marriage, Thalira. This isn't just a contract, it's a lifetime commitment. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Thalira looked down for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Neither of us expected this, but I believe we can make it work. We have to. The future of my people depends on it. She paused, meeting his gaze. I won't ask you to love me, not yet, but I will ask for your respect, and that we work together to strengthen the bond between our worlds. Mark's mind raced. He had come to Drazel as part of a diplomatic mission, and he had never imagined things would go this far. But now he was being asked to be a partner in something much larger than either of them. The responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders, and yet there was something in Thalira's eyes, something vulnerable, that made him reconsider his initial reluctance. I'll respect you, Thalira. I promise that, Mark said, his voice steady. But I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I don't know if I'm ready to be a ruler, to share in the decisions of your people. Thalira stepped closer, her presence filling the space between them. You don't have to be ready, Mark. We'll face it together. You don't have to become something you're not. But you can be someone who stands beside me. That's all I'm asking. Mark nodded, the weight of her words settling in. He didn't have to have all the answers, he didn't have to be perfect. He just had to try. And in a strange way, that felt like something he could do. The idea of partnering, with Thalira, of being by her side, suddenly didn't seem so impossible. As the days went by, the preparations for their union continued. Mark was shown the various customs of Drazel, including the intricate rituals that would take place during the wedding ceremony. He learned about the history of the royal family and the importance of the marriage between him and Thalira. It was not just a personal bond, it was a political one, meant to unite two very different worlds. Thalira, though distant at times, was patient with him. She answered his questions, explained the traditions, and shared stories about her childhood and the values of her people. It was in these moments that Mark began to see a different side of her. She wasn't just a warrior princess, hardened by years of battle. She was a woman with her own dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. But even as their bond grew stronger, the pressure of the situation hung heavy in the air. The Drazalian people were watching, waiting to see how the human warrior would fit into their world. Mark knew that he couldn't afford to fail. The stakes were too high, not just for him, but for Thalira and her people. Finally, the day of the ceremony arrived. The palace was alive with energy, its halls adorned with flowers and banners of silver and gold. The royal attendants were busy, ensuring everything was in place. Mark, dressed in elaborate ceremonial robes, stood before a large mirror, adjusting his outfit. He didn't recognize the man staring back at him. He had gone from a simple soldier to a key figure in a royal alliance. As he prepared for the ceremony, Mark's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Thalira, radiant in her wedding gown. The gown was a flowing dress of white and silver, adorned with intricate patterns that shimmered with light. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, and her expression was serene, though Mark could see the slightest hint of nervousness in her eyes. You look, Mark started, but the words caught in his throat. He had no idea how to describe what he was feeling. She was breathtaking, but the situation was so surreal that it almost didn't feel real. Thalira smiled softly, her gaze meeting his. So, do you, Mark? But I think we can both agree that this is strange. But we will get through it. Together. Mark nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Today they would become something more than adversaries, more than strangers. Today they would become partners. Together, he repeated, the weight of the word settling over him. This wasn't what he had expected when he first stepped onto Drazel, but somehow it felt like the right path. He didn't know what the future would bring, but with Thalira by his side, he was ready to face it. The grand hall was filled with people, their faces a blur of bright colors and eager expressions. The Drazalian royal family, The counselors and even foreign dignitaries from neighboring planets had gathered for the wedding. Today was a monumental day, one that would change the course of history. The marriage between Thalira and Mark was not just a union of two individuals, it was the merging of two worlds, two cultures, and two peoples. Mark stood nervously at the front of the hall, dressed in the royal attire provided for him. The robes were heavier than he was used to, adorned with gold stitching and intricate patterns that spoke of Drazalian tradition. The weight of the garments wasn't the only thing weighing on him. His heart pounded in his chest, and his thoughts raced. Just a few weeks ago, he had been a simple soldier, sent on a diplomatic mission. Now he stood on the brink of becoming part of a royal family, a part of Drazal's future. His eyes flickered to Thalira, who stood beside him. Her figure was striking, even more so than when he had first seen her in the arena. She was dressed in a flowing gown, the fabric shimmering like the stars. The gown hugged her form perfectly, with intricate silver patterns running through the fabric. Her long silver hair cascaded down her back, and the crown she wore was a work of art, delicate yet powerful. She looked every bit the princess, the ruler she had been born to be. But as she glanced at Mark, there was something in her eyes, something human that made her seem more approachable, more real. The ceremony was set to begin. The high priest of Drazal stepped forward, his voice booming as he began the traditional rites. Mark, although nervous, followed the instructions he had been given, reciting the words of the ceremony in perfect sync with Thalira. As they stood, side by side, Mark could feel the weight of the moment. He had not come here to be a king or to rule, but standing next to Thalira, he realized how much responsibility was about to be thrust upon them. The vows were spoken, and Mark could feel the intensity of Thalira's gaze on him as she pledged her loyalty to. The weeks after the wedding had been filled with ceremonial duties, political meetings, and the heavy responsibilities of ruling Drazal. Mark had learned much about the planet, its customs, and the immense weight that came with Thalira's position as the leader of her people. The complexities of the political landscape had caught him off guard at first, but with Thalira's patient guidance, he was slowly starting to find his footing. Yet, despite their growing bond, the kingdom was not without its challenges. The whispers of dissent were growing louder. Some of the more traditional factions of the Drazalian Council were still deeply uncomfortable with the union between their princess and a human. They saw it as an affront to their centuries-old traditions, a violation of the natural order. The union, though politically beneficial, was still viewed by many as an oddity, a disruption to the established power dynamics. Mark and Thalira had discussed the unrest in private many times. They both knew that the marriage was not just a symbol of unity between their people. It was a living testament to the changes that were taking place in Drazal. It was a future that could either uplift the kingdom or fracture it. The pressure on them both was immense. One evening, as Mark sat at the royal table, reviewing reports about the state of Drazal's borders, Thalira entered the room. Her expression was serious, her usual confidence replaced with something harder, something Mark had learned to recognize as determination. "We need to talk," Thalira said, her voice low. "There's trouble on the northern border." Mark looked up, setting down the papers in front of him. "What kind of trouble?" Thalira's eyes darkened. "A group of rebels. They're growing in number, and they're becoming more organized. They oppose our union, and they're rallying support from the council." Mark's heart sank. The council had been uneasy from the start, and it seemed that their fears were now becoming a reality. The rebels were dangerous, yes, but it was the underlying tension within the council that worried Mark more. The kingdom was on the verge of fracture, and it would take more than just military might to hold it together. "What do we do?" Mark asked, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. Thalira didn't answer immediately. She paced around the room, her fingers brushing against the edges of the ancient stone walls. The room felt colder as the silence stretched between them. Finally, she stopped and looked directly at Mark. "I'm going to the northern border," she said. "We need to show the rebels that we're not afraid, that we're willing to fight for this kingdom and our future." Mark felt a surge of concern. You can't go alone, Thalira. You're the ruler of this world. If something happens to you, I've always fought alone, she interrupted, her tone soft but firm. I am the leader of this people. My presence will make the difference. If we're going to survive this, I need to show them that I'm not just a princess sitting behind a throne. I am their warrior queen. Mark understood her need to prove herself, but his heart ached at the thought of her going into danger alone. He had always admired her strength, but it had never been more important to him than it was now. Let me come with you, he said, his voice quieter this time. I'll be at your side. We'll face this together. Thalira hesitated, her gaze softening for a brief moment. Then she nodded, her lips curling into a faint smile. Together, she agreed. But you must understand, Mark. This is more than just about fighting rebels. This is about proving to my people that our union is strong, that we will stand firm against all threats. This is a test of loyalty, not just to me, but to our marriage, to our future. Mark nodded, his resolve solidifying. He had known from the beginning that their bond was more than just personal. It was political too. If they were to succeed in uniting their worlds, they would have to prove that they could endure any challenge, no matter how great. The next morning, they set off for the northern border. The journey was long, and the terrain grew harsher the further they went. Drazal was a planet of extremes. Lush green valleys gave way to barren deserts, and towering mountains loomed over vast plains. The northern border was a place of ancient stone fortresses, long abandoned and windswept hills. It was here that the rebels had gathered, in the forgotten corners of the kingdom where few dared to tread. As they traveled, Mark and Thalira spoke little. The journey was dangerous, and the weight of what they were about to face hung over them both. Mark had fought in countless battles, but this was different. This wasn't just a skirmish. It was a test of everything they had built together. By the time they arrived at the northern fortress, the sun was setting, casting a fiery glow over the desolate landscape. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. The fortification, once a symbol of Drazal's strength, now stood as a crumbling reminder of the kingdom's past. But it was also the site of the rebellion, and it was here that Mark and Thalira would make their stand. As they approached the gates, Mark could feel the tension in the air. The rebels had likely been watching for days, waiting for their move. The time for diplomacy was over. It was time to show them that Drazal would not be torn apart by their division. Thalira stood tall as they approached the gates, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. The wind whipped her silver hair around her face, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes were steely, focused on the task ahead. "Stay close," she murmured to Mark, her voice low. "This won't be easy." Mark didn't reply. Instead, he nodded, his hand resting on the side of his own weapon. The tension between them was palpable, but he could feel the strength in Thalira's resolve. She was a leader, and she would face this challenge head-on. As they entered the gates, they were met by the rebels, fierce, ragged fighters who had lived in the shadows for far too long. They were led by a man named Corin, a former general of Drazal's army who had turned against the crown after the royal family's alliance with Earth. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a hard gaze that never left Thalira. "So, the princess finally arrives," Corin sneered. "I see you've brought your human pet along for the ride." Thalira's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond to his taunt. Instead, she stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "I am not here to fight you, Corin," she said. "I am here to show you that Drazal is stronger than any rebellion. We are united now, and no matter what you do, you cannot tear us apart." Corin's lip curled into a sneer, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You think your union with a human makes you stronger? You've lost the faith of your people. They see you as weak, Thalira. You're nothing but a puppet." Thalira's gaze hardened, and Mark could feel the tension rising. The words cut deep, but she didn't let them show. She had faced challenges before, but this was different. This was personal. "I'm not a puppet," Thalira said quietly. "I am the ruler of Drazal, and I will protect it with everything I have. You will not win this fight, Corin. Not because I am stronger, but because I believe in my people. I believe in what we can become together. That's something you'll never understand." Corin's expression flickered, a brief moment of uncertainty crossing his face, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. With a sharp gesture, he ordered his men to attack. The battle was fierce. Mark fought alongside Thalira, his every move instinctive, honed by years of training. But there was something different about this fight. This wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about proving their loyalty to each other, to their kingdom, and to the future they were building. Thalira was a force to be reckoned with. Her sword danced through the air with deadly precision, cutting through the rebels with a power Mark had never seen before. She fought not just for herself, but for the entire kingdom, for everything she had ever believed in. And Mark fought beside her, his every movement a testament to the bond they had forged. As the battle raged on, the tide began to turn. The rebels, once so confident in their cause, began to falter. Thalira and Mark fought as one, a seamless team, their every action in perfect harmony. And in the end, it was the unity between them that won the day. Corin, seeing his forces falling apart, retreated into the shadows, vowing that the fight was far from over. But Mark and Thalira had made their point. They had shown the rebels, and the kingdom, that they were stronger together than they were apart. As the sun set behind the northern fortress, Mark and Thalira stood side by side, their weapons lowered, their bodies bruised but unbroken. They had faced the test of loyalty, and they had passed. The battle was over, but the war, both external and internal, was far from won. The rebels, although defeated for now, had shown the cracks in the foundation of Drazal's unity. Mark and Thalira had proven that they could fight side by side, but the real challenge was yet to come. The kingdom's future rested on more than just physical strength. It rested on trust, on cooperation, and on the strength of their union. Mark and Thalira stood together on the northern border, looking out over the now quiet battlefield. The wind, once howling through the ruined fortresses, had calmed, and the sun was beginning to dip behind the distant hills, casting the world in a warm, golden light. The rebels had retreated, their leader, Corin, vowing that they would rise again. But Mark and Thalira knew that the battle for Drazal's future was far from over. "We've made a statement," Mark said, his voice quiet, yet filled with a sense of pride. "But this isn't